Hey, y'all.
Hey, hey. Why am I hearing that over there? Welcome back to Night Shift with Andrea Up Late. Oh, my goodness. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I missed you guys last week. We took a hiatus last week. There was a birthday party in the house, and so we just kind of took the week to celebrate. But welcome back, and we're happy to see you guys. I'm joined tonight, as always, with my co-host BC Sanders, also co-host of the Disruptors podcast with BC and Ski. You got a lot going on, it sounds like.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Oh, I'm great. I'm always good when we can jump on.
Yeah.
Especially this week.
Hello.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm enjoying everybody. Yes, especially this week, and I cannot wait to tell you guys what we're doing. For those of you who might be new listeners to this show, this is a live YouTube show on Tuesday nights, every Tuesday night at 8/7 Central on the Andrea Up Late YouTube channel for the show Night Shift. And then we drop to streaming platforms wherever you listen to your podcast. So Spotify, iTunes, all that. We'll usually drop the next day or two. If you just want to listen in your car or whenever you're doing whatever you're doing. But as I mentioned, my co-host is BC Sanders. He does have his own podcast, the Disruptors podcast with BC and Ski. You've had a lot going on with that recently, a whole lot of new guests, a lot of stuff lined up.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So I've gotten back on schedule. I just posted a new episode today.
Okay.
So yeah, I've had, today I posted a Blood Gang member. I think so far, quite a few people have listened to it and given me some feedback. They liked it. Had an undercover detective out of Arizona that worked Hammerskins, the Klan, and a lot of other white supremacist groups.
Okay.
Had Hector Bravo.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a YouTube channel called That Prison Guard. And he's got like 15,000 followers. And the reason I say is like a lot of people just enjoy
listening
his
to him
and what he's putting out. So yeah. Got quite a few people already stacked up, episodes to drop every week.
That was an extra sparkly water.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we will definitely talk all things gang and all things disruptors at the end of this episode. We usually have been starting the show with pop culture references based on the year that the crime occurred. Tonight, I'm going to not do that tonight. I just am not kind of feeling it for this show. You guys, the show we're going to do tonight is a little different in the sense that, well, if you are familiar with Night Shift, you know that we primarily, not always, cover unsolved cases. And we do that for a few reasons. It's always makes for good talking points. It makes for interesting conversation. But, it's always good to get the word out there. We've talked about it. We've had victims' families reach out. Because when something's unsolved, now in this day and age, with the internet the way it is, with, social media the way it is, you never know. Advances in technology, I feel like I say the same spiel every week, but it's so true. So you never really know what that one more mention of a case might do. This week, however, we can't call this unsolved. I think we can call it unresolved. We are talking about a case that is the death of an 18-year-old boy in Tennessee, a young man there, that was ruled an accidental death, a freak accident, if you will. And I want you guys to see what you think. We're going to lay it out pretty plainly for you. I've been talking to his mother on and off for weeks now. We were texting literally up until a few minutes ago before the show started. And we're excited to say that she's going to be on the show next week. So this is a doozy. Settle in, buckle up, get the popcorn, put on your investigator hats, because we're going to talk the case today, or what potentially is the case today, right? And then next week, we're going to unfold it. We're going to unwrap it and get into all the boxes, all the layers, because there's so much more. And we're going to be excited to have her on, the victim's mother, on next week in regards to this case. So welcome to our new listeners. If you are listening via just audio podcast, again, you may hear us occasionally engage in the chats, meaning that if you log into a YouTube account, it's free. You can just create one with your email. You're always welcome to get in the chats with us on these Tuesday night shows. It's great for a back and forth, for questions, for clarification, these kinds of things. And so we will sometimes reach out and say hello to those in the chats or answer questions toward the end of the show and those kinds of things. If you don't know, I am a nurse. Most of my years were spent in the ICU, pediatrics specifically for the biggest chunk of that. And BC Sanders, my co-host, is a retired homicide lieutenant. So between the two of us, we kind of have, and we both have quite an interest in psychology, would you say? So those are the things we kind of use as we're talking about the show or the cases that we are discussing. So I say we should get into it today. I'm going to get started. What do you say?
Perfect.
Oh, my goodness. That should be a soundbite all on itself. I feel like every week at some point I just sigh and say, oh, my goodness. Okay, guys. So today we are talking about something that occurred in Middle Tennessee in July of 2020. Okay. And then as we continue to talk, we're going to take it back quite a few years before that. We're going to be talking about Franklin and Nashville, Tennessee. So as we've discussed, that's my hometown. That's my stomping grounds. My family is also there. That's where I grew up. And so these areas, that means nothing except to say that when I'm speaking with his mother or reading about these places, when you can just kind of picture an area. So that lends toward that a little bit, but we're going to be talking about that area of Tennessee. So we're going to be talking today about Grant Solomon. Okay. So Grant Solomon was born on June 13th, 2002. Like I said, he grew up in the Middle Tennessee area. He was a baseball boy. So Grant quickly got into athletics. He loved all things baseball, was set to actually be on his way to the big time when it came to it. In fact, at the time of his death, he was looking to hopefully be getting into the colleges that he would have picked to play ball for, and all of these kinds of things. So that's what he did. Grant had a little sister named Gracie, about 4 years younger than he is. And his parents are Angie and Aaron Solomon. So Angie is who I said that I've been in contact with so much leading up until this show tonight. And she's a busy bee. We're going to talk about why in a moment. But Angie is actually, she's got her PhD and she's a pharmacist. So she's a doctor pharmacist, if you will. But so she's got quite an education, quite a career. And so that's Grant's mother. Grant's father was a longtime news anchor for WSMV Channel 4, which is a pretty major news outlet there in Nashville. So if you live in or around that area, you've heard of it. And that's where Aaron worked for many years, in fact. So as Grant got older, he and his little sister attended what's called GCA. It's Grace Christian Academy, and that's there in Franklin. So it's a beautiful school. It's it used to have kind of like think of barn-esque, but much larger, much nicer, and it's set in the rolling hills there in Middle Tennessee in Franklin. So beautiful area. And that's where they both went to school for years. So let's move on forward to Grant's senior year of high school. Grant had just turned 18 in June of 2020, and now it's going to be July of 2020, specifically July 20th. Grant was recovering he had COVID, and you guys, if you remember, it's so hard to remember how different everything was that year, but this was July of 2020. So things were shut down. You couldn't, get in and around places very much. You can have individual appointments rather than group outings, if you will. And that's kind of exactly what was occurring at this time for Grant, because he was going to be visiting what's called WPI. It's Ward Performance Institute there in Gallatin, which is like a suburb of Nashville, Tennessee. And he was going to be meeting his father there to do some training for baseball. So this was a kind of, if you picture almost like aluminum building type place, parking lot. You go in, and then they're going to have all the stuff to individually train these baseball players for those that need and want the extra practice. Well, they were shut down because of the pandemic at this time, and they were just kind of offering individual appointments. Well, as far as Grant was aware, he had an appointment that morning on July 20th at 9 o'clock in the morning. And like I said, he was going to meet his father there. So Grant gets in his truck, which was a white Toyota Tacoma. I'm pulling up something right here for you guys right now. Sorry about that. It was a 2015 Tacoma. Okay. And he was going to meet his dad. Now, Gallatin is located, let's say 45 minutes to an hour away from Franklin, where Grant lived. And this is important. And we're going to talk about why that's important here in a moment. But he gets there, he's meeting his dad. And like I said, his appointment's at 9. He gets there around between 8:37 and 8:40 in the morning. So there was a little time to spare, a little time to be had. I'm going to go on and play for you now what becomes his father's 911 call, because immediately upon getting to WPI, the Ward Performance Institute, tragedy strikes, however you want to look at this. And Grant is found under his truck in a ditch near Highway 109, which was the main highway that transected there in front of WPI. So let's take a listen to Grant Solomon's 911 call, his father's call, when this happens. Okay. Well, we're trying, you guys. Give it like 3 seconds before it. Sorry, it's kind of loading up here. You got anything right now, BC?
I don't. Just that everybody kind of pay attention.
Yeah, please listen to details here.
I'm trying. Where's your emergency? It's 1357 South Water Street. It's off 109. Please hurry. You said 57? Please hurry. Okay, what's going on? 1357. My son's truck backed over him, and it's rolled over him and dragged him into the ditch, and it's on top of him. He's trapped under the truck, and somehow it drug him underneath it. Yes, my son is under it. I'm trying to call 911. Okay, what's your name? Oh my God. My name is Aaron Solomon. And you said 1357 South Water Avenue, right? Yes. How old is the male? He's 18. He just turned 18 a couple weeks, about a month ago. It's my son. Oh my God. Oh my God, this is not good. Is he awake? Oh, please hurry. I don't know. I don't think so. He's not alert, right? No, he's out. And he's trapped. I got 3 guys here, and he's trapped under the truck. Okay. Oh my God. I understand, sir. Stay on the phone with me while we get somebody out there. What's your name? Aaron Solomon. All right, Aaron. Huh? What kind of vehicle is it? It's a Toyota Tacoma, and it's the vehicle he's underneath the vehicle. Okay, I've got that. And it's... Okay, I've got that. What color is it? It's a white truck. That's my son. Somehow it's backed up. Yeah. Yeah, I'm on with 911 right now. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Was your son working on it? No, he was just getting out of it. We're on an incline, and I guess he didn't have it in park or something, or it wasn't engaged, or... Oh my God. Oh my God, I can't believe this. Still not responding? No.
And he's still under trust. No one can get out from under it. We've got units en route to you. I'm just asking you questions so we can update them, okay? Can you check and see if he's breathing?
Somebody's telling me that he's coming too.
Okay,
Maybe.
He's waking up, kind of keeping still. So he is.
Well, he can't move. I don't think he can move. I don't know.
Okay,
He can't move. He's trapped.
Okay, well, we got somebody en route. Now, when he wakes up, he might be scared. Can somebody come there and talk to him?
Yeah, somebody talk to him. Shit. Gee, there's blood. Is he facing up or down? He's facing up. They said he may aspirate. We need to hurry. Oh, my God.
So does he have blood coming out of his mouth?
Yeah, there's blood coming out. Yeah, somehow it drug him down, I think. I don't know whether it was an infarct or what, or if it didn't engage the brain, or it drug him underneath somehow.
Okay.
They said he's facing up.
Okay.
But he's bleeding from his mouth. So, Grant, turn your face to the side if you can, barely, but be careful.
Don't move him, okay?
We can't move him. We can't move him.
All right, Ethan, they're there. I'm gonna let you go, okay?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Sorry, guys. I don't know what I got going on here. Okay. Let me get back to the comments so I can see what you guys are saying. Anybody, what you got?
Yeah. So they were making some comments earlier about the actual tone, like in his voice, how it was kind of flat, or he didn't sound
Panicked,
scared, panicked.
Okay.
And I apologize. I think somebody had commented he also has time to have a side conversation with someone while he's on the phone with 911.
Okay. So those are the people that Aaron says are there tending to his son. We're going to backtrack, and I'm going to give you a little history with Grant and his father, Aaron, and the relationship also between his sister and his father. And then we're going to come back. We won't listen to that whole 911 call again, but we're going to dissect it a little more once you have a different picture. I wanted you to have more of an objective view of who Grant is and what happened that morning and what his father says happened, at least, and what that 911 call sounds like with the pictures. If you guys are listening to this as an audio podcast only, you're free to go back on YouTube at any time and see the pictures that I have put up alongside this narrative. Also, you're going to be able to find them on the Andrea Up Late Instagram page within the next couple of days. I'll put all these pictures up. But for now, let's go back and let's talk a little bit about Grant and his family. Okay, I told you that the time that this occurred, he was a senior at Grace Christian Academy in Franklin, Tennessee. He was well on his way to do great things in baseball. It's really kind of all he did. He hung out with his girlfriend. He spent a lot of time with his mom and his sister, and he played a whole lot of baseball. So in 2013, Angie and Aaron got a divorce. This was not pretty. The events leading up to this were not pretty. And then things actually did not start to get better immediately upon this split at all. So we have many, many allegations of history of abuse at the hands of Aaron. Okay. Now this spans the family. You can read and find that Angie will say that for Grant, it was psychological, emotional abuse. There were times in Grant's history that Aaron was known to control even his bowel habits. when he could and cannot go to the restroom. He would call him fat. He would refrain from feeding him for these reasons. You've got to understand that the objective facts, at least, are that Aaron was very sports obsessed when it comes to his son and the performance of his son. And he was also very, I guess you could say, very concerned with appearances. And this came easily for him because remember what I told you, he was a well-known anchor, particularly doing sports for WSMV, for that Channel 4 station there in Nashville. Okay. So he was a well-known face around town. I remember watching him for years when I lived in the area. He had a lot of connections that we're going to get into next week. But in terms of the appearances, in terms of what he wanted people to see when they look at his family and his son, is success, money, and definitely this, view of Grant, that he was going to do these things and do them correctly. So like I said, he would control a lot of things in Grant's life, down to the minutia and down to some really bizarre things like bathroom habits. When it comes to Angie, Grant's mother, this is where you start to get a real good feel of how this family worked, the dynamics here. Angie will tell you that there came one point in their lives when they were all still under the same roof that she and Gracie would sleep in one bedroom, and often Grant would sleep in there with them to, quote, protect them. I think that if you were to give one word to Grant now, I think that the word protector is what I have heard and read so many times. His sister and his mother both will say that ultimately all he wanted to do was protect them from his father. Now, leading up to this terrible event in 2020, there was one time, for instance, when Angie would say, she'll tell you now, and she'll tell you next week on the show, that she didn't know initially the verbal portion. She didn't understand she was being abused. She didn't understand this was changing the way her brain worked, the way she responded to him, what she expected out of him, maybe how she changed her behaviors to mitigate that, or how she would just come to expect certain behaviors with Aaron and consider it normal because it was in fact normal for him, for them in that dynamic, right? So as the abuse continued to escalate, if you will, it was kind of this perfect storm. We've talked about these kinds of cases before where he had the clout, he has the deep pockets, he has the contacts. That coupled with Angie's desire to keep her kids safe, and almost to a frantic point, once this got to a head, that he would take Angie to court to deem her not able to care for the children. Okay. And I'm going to let her tell you about that next week. But one prime example would be when Aaron flew into a fit of rage, which Angie will say, and his daughter Gracie will say the same, that he was prone to, that things maybe even kill for a while. He would fly into a fit of rage and react and then almost panic. She talks about one such instance where he had cornered her in the bathroom and was going to choke her. And then she was able to snap him out of it, like this fit of rage. And then once he realized what he had done, almost like he woke up or like snapped out of it, he ran out of the house and ran like up and down the sidewalk. Okay. Super bizarre. That's a little different than things I've heard of. But one such instance is Angie will tell you he attacked her and it tried to kill her. He wrapped a hairdryer cord around her neck. When they go to court to talk about this, he's able to flip this script. This seems to consistently be, at least where my frustrations lie, because this is where everything changed for them because of this. So he flips the script and says that she is unstable. She should not take care of these children, that she was suicidal. However, Angie was able to bring to the table a couple of different psychologists or psychiatrists, mental health professionals, and a medical doctor who all corroborated her story that she was in fact stable. She was not suicidal, had zero suicidal ideations. And the medical doctor corroborated that those wounds were inconsistent with self-harm, that this had to have been done at the hands of someone else. And still, she was deemed unstable, unable to take care of these children. So unfortunately, the children were put in his care for a time. She will talk about having no money at this time. He took everything. She would take the bus to go across town to see the children. You guys remember I told you about her profession. None of this should be happening. So this is kind of where things were escalating leading up to 2020. And then unfortunately, we have Gracie, the younger sister, that would later describe the sexual abuse that she endured at the hands of her father. You guys, if things do trigger you or bother you, this case involves almost a minor's death. Grant, like I said, had just turned 18 when he died. Sexual abuse, psychological, physical abuse. There's a lot to this case. Okay. So Gracie will talk about how when she was little bitty, this was part of Aaron's control. Okay. We've seen these kinds of things before when it comes to the control. It starts out in certain ways and it grows until that one person is in control of every little moving piece of the household. Right. So Gracie will say that when she was 5, 6 years old, her father would bathe her. He would keep her mother out. Now, this didn't start as such. If you think, I guess, like, why would her mom stay out? Because it didn't start with, oh, dad's doing bad things to me. Mom can't be in there for it. It wasn't like that. He just took over bathing and, you fall into routines in a household. And so as Gracie got older and started understanding what had been happening to her, she was remembering, right? And so she was remembering details of her father touching her in a certain way when she was in the bathtub, when she was little. She later says, you can go on YouTube and watch. Gracie put out a video in 2021, May of 2021, Gracie Solomon, regarding her father and all the allegations that she alleges against him. And she says that he often had his phone out and on while she was in the bathtub or in the shower. And she, now that she's gotten older, realizes that likely he was filming or taking pictures and she didn't know it at the time. Okay. So these kinds of things were going on with Gracie. Fast forward at this point now, Angie knows what's going on with Gracie. Grant knew what was going on with Gracie. Grant knew how he felt about his own father. These escalations it was only getting worse. And so Gracie did allege that there were more than one time when she would say that she would get just unreasonably sleepy out of nowhere and her body wouldn't feel right. Like she wouldn't be able to move her legs right. And she woke up in her father's bed with like a rash on her legs and she didn't feel good and she didn't understand why. So for a while, she wasn't understanding what was happening to her. So leading up to this event with Grant, by now, Aaron had it such that Angie was not able to have the children in her custody, right? She could visit them. She could not have them fully at her house. Grant had just started telling everyone that he knew, his close friends and his family, that upon turning 18, he was going to go to court. He was going to file to take over custody of Gracie, of his little sister. And Aaron knew this to be true. Okay. So we have that tidbit, like I said, and then I don't know. I'm just like,
yeah,
it's a tough one.
Well, and it lays the groundwork leading up to that day.
That day in July.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back now to that day in July. Let's go back to that 911 call that we just heard, and let's talk about what happened in the moments after the accident and after what we just listened to on that call. So Aaron calls 911. EMS gets there. Police get there. pretty quickly. Within 2, 3, 4 minutes, they're all rolling in. In fact, you could hear the sirens there on the phone at the end of that 911 call. On the call, Aaron says that there are men. He actually specifies 3. I have 3 men here. 3 men here. They're, you know, and whenever the dispatcher is asking him questions about Grant, he's saying, I don't know. And he asks then the supposed men that were down by Grant, and then he would answer the dispatcher. You guys, the reason this is because Aaron never walked down to his son. In fact, he'll tell you that. He says that he stayed up pacing the parking lot to call 911. He doesn't really give a reason as to why he didn't go down to him. He never will say why he didn't go down to him. If you have no other takeaway, for me, if I knew nothing else about this entire story, the biggest thing that would jump out at me is that he says that he knows his son is under this truck. He's calling 911, and he not one time goes down to him. It's heartbreaking to hear Angie recount it now, because of course she was not there, and she talks about how she would have acted, how any of us would act if we were faced with the same situation. So he calls. We will get back into the scene, what that looks like, what that crash looks like, what would or wouldn't even be feasible based on the way that's all set up. But in the moments after this, he calls 911. He then calls Angie to let her know she has to drive to the hospital there. It's going to be Sumner Regional Medical Center. That's outside. That's right there in Gallatin. That would not normally be the hospital they would go to, but that's closest to where they were located at that time at that baseball training facility. So Angie has to drive about 45 minutes to an hour from her home in Franklin to get to the hospital there. By the time she gets there, she learns that Grant had passed away from his injuries. But when she gets there, Aaron is actually already coordinating for the music that would be provided at Grant's funeral. You guys, this is within moments of the pronouncement of death. Okay. Also, she says that she falls on the floor, collapses. She'll say she doesn't know how long she was on the floor when she hears the news. And when she stands up, Aaron is saying something along the lines of, now we can be a family. We can all be a family now. And I want to vomit at that.
Yeah.
So she also learns that he's already declined an autopsy. We're going to talk about that. This is what the autopsy is. This is integral here. The fact that he declined one, because the on record for the medical examiner, meaning that based on the way the way Grant presented, hospital staff had to then pass this death off to the medical examiner so they could rule whether or not they were going to do an autopsy. The reason they would do this is if in these boxes, which I'll put some pictures of this up, whatever Angie allows on Instagram. Angie sent all of this over to BCNI. She actually had to request all of these records per FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. The hospital, the police department, no one was wanting to hand over any of these things, even though this was deemed an accidental death. This was not a murder investigation. But you'll see how tight-lipped and how close-fisted all of this stuff has been. So she actually did go on and get a subpoena for the FOIA and got these documents and sent them to us. So we have them all here, and we've been poring over them. So on the actual medical examiner's report, they check the box that says that the type of death was either violent or traumatic. It'll say violent or trauma. And per Tennessee state rules or laws regarding autopsies and when they're going to be deemed necessary. I actually have it here, the proper verbiage. I'll pull it out in a moment. But essentially, it's whenever there is a death per vehicle crash, and then that's more like subcategorized as violent or traumatic, which this one was. Either way, Aaron declined one without Angie having the option to do so. Very soon after this, Aaron then declined any forensic recovery or investigation of the truck. Now, in the 911 call, you hear Aaron saying, he actually says a lot, if you notice. He does a lot of explaining to the dispatcher what he thinks happened in the moments that his son is actually dying under this truck without being beside him. And a lot of the things he says is that I don't know. I don't know if he didn't have it in park. Maybe it rolled over him. I think it drug him down. I don't know if he didn't park it. If he, a lot of this, he's telling a story. Okay. Meaning he's telling them a story. He's setting up a story, if you will. But he denied any forensic studies on this truck, even though he thinks, per what he says, that this truck was faulty and it popped out of gear and it rolled over and killed his son. And he doesn't want any testing done on it. Okay. So what you got so far?
I was just going to say, I think you're about to get into the duration of the police presence on scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Oh, no. You are free to get ahead.
I would just say that, one, when we've been discussing this,
mm-hmm.
That we stay neutral. We're looking at it. Mm-hmm. We're asking ourselves questions.
I actually always try to prove somebody fully innocent in my brain.
Right. Yes.
To see if that's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how you do it. And so one of the things that we often talk about, especially in this situation, is just that, like what the investigation held, what statements were like, what was the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And before we get into all that, just talking about the behavior,
mm-hmm.
There are a lot of red flags, and those things could potentially be answered. We always know that. But at this point, you and I both can't really answer kind of the incongruent behavior
mm-hmm.
of a child or someone's son underneath a vehicle and the father not being,
it blows my mind,
beside the truck or even close enough to render some kind of aid or be able to walk 911 through what's going on.
Well, I think two things. You're either going to want to fix it,
mm-hmm.
meaning you're going to want to move the truck. You're going to want to
mm-hmm.
pull him out, even if, that would be contraindicated, whatever. You're going to do whatever you can. Or you're going to comfort him. You're going to touch his face. You're going to look at him. You're going to be face to face. You're not going to be 50 feet away in the parking lot. So real quick, this will be the Sumner Regional Medical Center's intake. This is the emergency department record. And so I will just read to you quickly what they say. These eyes of mine. And this says, this 18-year-old white male presents to the ER with complaints, they say with complaints of CPR. So what they're saying is that they get there and EMS is still providing CPR to him. He presents with trauma and cardiac arrest. He was trying to stop his car from rolling and it rolled over him. He was trapped under the vehicle. He rapidly went into cardiac arrest, which was described as PEA. That just means pulseless electronic activity. That means if you look at a monitor, it looks like there's a heart rate present, but if you actually feel for a pulse, there's not one, okay? Once he was extracted from under the vehicle, he was noted to have severe head injury and was intubated prior to his arrival. They talk about the IVs they placed, the chest compressions that they were doing, the fluids they gave him. It said he was noted to have blood from the nose and mouth and ears and a severe laceration to the back of his scalp with suspected skull fracture. We find out later that, in fact, there was an open skull fracture. So the back of his head was a significant fracture to the skull there. No deformities. Please listen, you guys. No deformities were noted at his legs. They did what's called needle decompression, which is where they insert a needle to get out any air or fluid that could have been accumulated. They don't know if that was the case or not. They do that because if they suspect that he was run over by a vehicle, you can expect that to cause like some crushing injuries, right? So broken ribs, these kinds of things, which then can cause blood or other fluids or air to be trapping your lungs to where you can't breathe. So they do that just kind of as one of their diagnostic tools in an accident like this. But please note that when they did those decompressions on both sides of his body, no air and no blood came out, meaning he did not have crushing injuries, pointing more likely to the fact that this truck did not roll over him. Okay. So keep these things in mind. And then they talk about how they kind of continue to provide care there in the ER. I don't want to bore you guys with all of the medical stuff, but it's important to know that when we see if his injuries are consistent with what Aaron states happened or not. Okay. So we have that. Now let's get to the actual scene and what happened when the police get there. Okay. So we have multiple police dispatched to the scene. We're going to be talking specifically about one named Ty Wilson, because Ty is going to be the one that kind of wraps this all up in a pretty little bow toward the end. And you will learn that from the time police rolled on scene to the time that this case was closed, if you will, and the scene was cleared, was 57 minutes. So in less than 1 hour, a vehicle crash that resulted in a death, whether you consider that homicide or not, even if it was an accidental one, this was 57 minutes. Now, we also know that this was a major highway. This was a multiple lane highway, Highway 109 out there, okay? It was not closed down for any kind of reconstruction, anything like that. Can you lend to us, BC, just with those facts even, and pretend like you don't know as much about this case as you do, but just with those facts, would you consider that to be a timely wrap up of this scene? Or
Yeah, I would be shocked, or I was shocked, knowing that they were only on scene, it looks like, for less than an hour. Yeah, that was a little strange in the sense that normally you get on scene, especially if you've got more than one officer there. So you got to coordinate efforts. If you've got any kind of witnesses, you're taking statements. You're starting to set up your crime scene.
right.
If you're being told this isn't a crime, well, you're looking for why isn't it a crime? Like, who's telling me it's not a crime? So do I have any video footage? Do I have multiple witnesses? Does it appear it could have been just as everyone is telling?
Okay. So it gets interesting, right? Because Aaron says on that 911 call that there were 3 construction workers. I believe he even says on the call that it was construction workers. And he certainly says it later because he talks about men in the high visibility vests. Think like your neon yellow vest that you would wear at a construction site. He says that that's who's down there, these perfect strangers that are tending to his son that's trapped under this truck. And so he says that that's who he's talking to when he calls 911. However, we don't have statements from them anywhere. We don't have any witness statements. The only statement we have from anyone on scene other than the responding officers is Aaron Solomon's statement. Now, you could look at that either way because he says that he didn't see it happen. Well, he actually changes his story a few different times, and they're kind of specific details that matter, even though we know people handle trauma differently, right? Mm-hmm. People kind of recount. They can not get all their facts straight every time. But his story changes. Sometimes it's that he looked up. He says that he's sitting in his truck. He'll say that Grant parked to the left of him. So you're in your driver's side of your vehicle. If you look to your left and someone's parked beside you, unless you have absolutely zero peripheral vision whatsoever, you're going to see movement of that truck. In fact, I always think about how, if you're sitting at a light or in a parking spot and the person beside you moves a little bit and you feel like your own car is rolling backwards because it kind of makes you feel like that. So he says that one of the things he'll say is that Grant was getting out. He looks down at his email because he notices Grant get out of the truck because he's going to get his baseball things out, his equipment out of the back of the truck. He sometimes changes that. Sometimes he'll say out of the bed of the truck, the back, and that's when he continues to go on with the narrative that he thinks the truck popped out of gear and rolled over Grant, who at that time would have been standing behind the truck, okay, behind the bed of the truck. Now, on a side note, Angie and Gracie and his girlfriend and his buddies will all tell you that, number one, that sounds weird to them because Grant never kept his baseball equipment in the bed of his truck to roll around, to get too hot, to get dirty. This equipment is not cheap. And especially the older these boys get and the more serious they take the sport, it gets more and more expensive. So it would, we can take that one for what it's worth. That alone wouldn't be that big of a deal to me, but that in combination with everything else matters, that they say that's just not really the norm. He wouldn't do that. But then let's go to Aaron's other story, because sometimes he'll say to like the side of the truck, or he'll kind of indicate that more like he was going to open and like kind of reach to the back within the cab of the truck to get his baseball stuff. If that were the fact, and the truck popped out of gear, now he's on the side of the truck. You guys, please keep in mind that Grant was, depending on what you read, I think his mom said 6'4". I've read 6'3", 6'4", about 230 pounds. Grant was not small. He was athletic, obviously, just by nature. And this was a Toyota Tacoma. It wasn't lifted or giant tires or anything like that. A Tacoma is not an incredibly large truck either. So this isn't like some beast of a vehicle compared to the size of Grant. So these are things just to keep in mind when you kind of picture this scene, okay? So Aaron says that he notices Grant get out of the vehicle to go to the back to get his things. And then he looks down at his phone, because he said he had a work email, and he'll say it every time that he needed to see if it was something he needed to attend to. So he checks out this work email, and then sometimes he'll say, and then I heard a crash. I heard a loud noise. So I got out of I look over and don't see Grant's truck. So I get out and turn around and look and see it at the bottom of the ditch. Now, sometimes he'll say, I look over and I hear and I see Grant's truck going down into this ditch. But either way, let's start with the one where he says that he hears a noise, gets out, looks around, sees Grant's truck down in this ravine. He'll say that he looks around for Grant. Then he walks down to the edge of the pavement to look down into the ditch, if you will. He says that he looks into the windshield because he wants to see if Grant's like in the car the truck as it rolled down. And he'll say that's when he noticed Grant under the truck. And that's when he says that he immediately called 911. Well, have you considered, you guys listening, whether or not there were people inside this facility? Remember, they were supposed to have been meeting for a private baseball instruction. So Drew Hall at the time was the one running this WPI. Drew's account, now, not to the police, because remember, we don't have any witness statements from the police. This comes later, and we're going to get into all of this, but at some point, Angie hires her own private investigator to look into these things, okay? And when this happens, this investigator talks to Drew Hall, who was heading up that facility. He says that the only people there that day were himself and one other coworker, and that when all of this must have occurred, they were in the back, meaning they didn't see anything. He says that they have no exterior cameras. So he said that when he walked by the window, what actually caught his eye is that he saw some cars just parked differently than normal. Because usually it's kind of a small parking lot, guys. I'll put more pictures up on Andrea Upload on Instagram so you can see. But he said usually the cars are parked just like, vertically, like in succession, facing like straight up to their windows of the front of the building. Okay. And he said that as he walked by, things catch your eye that's out of the norm. And so he saw cars parked differently. We find out later, evidently, these were the cars that these mysterious construction workers that were helpers of Grant during this time, that belonged to them, as though they had maybe seen something from the highway, pulled in quickly so they weren't parked properly, if you will, in a space, and rushed down to Grant's aid. So Drew Hall, again, the one in charge of WPI, says that He sees these cars. He goes outside because he's confused as to what's going on. He looks over and sees Aaron in the parking lot. He said initially that he did not say that Aaron was on the phone. He says he sees Aaron and he was confused by this. He knows who Aaron is and he knows who Grant is. But he will then say that they didn't have an appointment that day. There was never an appointment for them to have at 9 o'clock that morning. So when he sees Aaron, he's a bit surprised. And he says that he asked him, Aaron, what are you doing here? Where's Grant? Okay. And so Aaron said, he's down there. His truck rolled over him. He's trapped under his truck. I'm calling 911. So that's Drew's recount of these events. So Drew says this initially to Angie's investigator that she hires privately. All right. So later, it's a little bit more difficult to get in touch with him. Things get a little different. I'm going to let Angie speak to that next week on the show. But that's what we have from him. In terms of the actual statements from police. Now, like I said, multiple. Are you guys hearing everything good? Everything, I think.
Yeah,
You back?
I think
Okay.
this is my camera.
Okay, good. So in terms of the actual Gallatin Police Department statements that we have, I wish you guys could see all these papers laying here. So we have a certain Ty Wilson. Keep his name in your head. We're going to let Angie talk to this as well about his essentially lack of narrative, lack of dialogue, lack of time spent. You know that we are not here to ever bash law enforcement. We don't do those things, but we look at things objectively. And also, if someone doesn't do the right thing, we're going to say that as well, because that puts a bad taste in people's mouth for the ones that are doing the proper thing, right? So this is Ty Wilson's official statement. This is his written statement per the accident that resulted in the death of someone. An unwitnessed accident, if you will, because Aaron will say he didn't see what happened. So even though, you know what I mean? It's kind of like people will say that Aaron was the only witness. Well, technically, he wasn't even a witness himself, you know, because per his story, he didn't see what happened. But Ty Wilson, this police officer says, he titles this Fatal Crash. And he says, quote, on Monday, July 20th, 2020, at approximately 8:44, I, Officer Wilson, responded to a serious incident on South Water 109 at number 1357. Upon arrival, I was able to initiate any further investigation. This is what he says. I was able to initiate any further investigation. Victim Grant Solomon was struck by his own vehicle and he was stuck underneath it. Let me ask you, when it comes to a report, particularly a report that results in a death, but even if not, let's say he just sustained serious injuries from this, knowing what you know, I don't know. I've never written a police statement. I don't know. Is this all he would normally write?
No, I mean, normally you would have a little more to most reports involving a death, especially an unexplained death. And someone may say, well, the death was explained. The
Okay.
truck ran over him. But I would imagine you'd want to be seeing a lot more information, a few more sentences, things that would just explain
More specifically
how
what
you
happened.
know that. Yeah, definitely. Like, were there 3 people on scene? You know, What did they say? What would corroborate what, the 911 call? Because, you get on scene, you don't know who's who at first.
Sure.
But yeah, you start to take statements. But yeah, she would look for, you'd see a little more in reports that will have a little more detail.
All right. So that's his. And he says someone named Toll. It says Officer Toll is who wrote this evidence property control form. And it says that the evidence property description is CD with photos. What even is? Oh, and statement. CD with photos and statement. That's it. Okay. So that I just read you Ty Wilson's statement. His is important. There's a reason I keep saying his name, because we're going to talk about this being a crash and how you want to investigate an injury, much less a fatality, due to a vehicle, right? So we also now have a statement from someone named Shore. So Officer Shore also got there. So it says on 7/20/2020, I, Officer Shore, responded to 1357 South Water for a serious injury crash. When I arrived on scene, EMS was rendering first aid to the victim, Grant Solomon. So we're already seeing a little more detail even in this first sentence in this other officer's note. I spoke with the father of the victim, Aaron L. Solomon. He stated that Grant was parked next to him in the parking lot. Aaron stated that he was doing some work in his car when he heard a loud noise. He stated he looked up and saw the truck wasn't there. Aaron stated he got out of his vehicle and noticed the truck had rolled into the ditch. Aaron stated saw his son underneath the truck and called 911. I assisted with gathering witness statements and traffic control until the scene was clear. Witness statements, you might ask, they don't exist.
Okay.
So either he's saying this and he didn't do it, or he did it and they have not been made available. Is there any reason they wouldn't be made available?
No, you could read that if someone gets on scene, say a sergeant or a lead investigator, or in this situation, like a crash reconstruction unit, and says, hey, don't worry about everything. We've got the information. This is a complete accident, whatever they say, and they tell everybody to clear. It could be a person's on scene, sees 3 or 4 people over there, and is going to take their statements. I don't know why there's not.
It also doesn't say, I am going to collect witness statements. Right. It says, I assisted with gathering witness statements.
Yes. And
traffic control until the scene was clear.
Yes. So you would think that there would be some statements in there.
There's just no reason you can think of, right, that they wouldn't be there. I guess that's what I'm saying. There's no reason that I'm just not thinking of that they wouldn't be made available or be present.
I do not if you're getting a full report like that. I would imagine all of that would be in that report.
Okay. So now we also have, the last one I'm going to read you guys is from Officer McElvey. This is going to be the most descriptive. And it says on 7/20/2020 at 8:43 a.m., I was dispatched to that address for an injury crash. I arrived on scene and found a male subject that was trapped under his vehicle in a rocky ditch area. Sumner County EMS and Gallatin Fire Department were already on scene attempting to get the male subject out. I spoke with the father of the male subject. He was identified as Mr. Aaron Solomon. Mr. Solomon stated that he was meeting his son Grant at the facility and that he had arrived there first. Mr. Solomon stated that he was sitting in his vehicle when Grant pulled in next to him in the white pickup truck. Mr. Solomon stated that he then noticed that the truck was no longer parked beside him, and he started to get out and look and heard a loud crash and observed Grant's truck had rolled down the hill and into the ditch. Mr. Solomon stated that he went over to the area of the truck and observed Grant under the vehicle. Mr. Solomon stated that he called 911 at that time and attempted to help his son. Okay. Mr. Solomon was able to get me information on his son, and he contacted Grant's mother and notified her of the situation. I gathered a written statement from Mr. Solomon, and he was released from the scene to go to Sumner Regional. I was not able to locate any other witnesses to the crash. I spoke with the gym employees and asked about camera footage. They stated they didn't have any cameras on the outside that would have gotten video of the incident. I turned the written statement and all other information over to MPO Ty Wilson. That's the one who had like the 3-sentence statement that I read you initially. Okay. This is the most descriptive of all the statements. He goes on to say that he looked for witnesses. There were not witnesses present, that he spoke with the workers of the place to ask about cameras. Now, I don't know why they weren't interviewed. I say interviewed, but asked to give any kind of a statement of what they came across. We have the traffic crash report here There's not much said to it, or not much here that really you're going to want to, or that's going to matter a whole lot right there, except for we're going to go in and read. Let's read Aaron Solomon's statement. So this is the statement he gives police at the time on the scene. My son Grant and I pulled into WPI separately, parked side by side. I was still in my car, but noticed my son get out to get his baseball gear out of the back of his truck. I looked down to check a work email, and the next thing I know, I hear and see the truck rolling backwards into the ditch. I get out of my car to try to find my son and saw that he was trapped underneath the truck and immediately called 911. I want you guys to know that whenever he references 911, he will say to you, I immediately called 911. What do you notice from his statement that stands out to you?
Well, some people will key in on like tense shifting, or like descriptive words in the sense of immediately called 911.
Mm-hmm.
So, and sometimes this is getting nitpicky, but sometimes it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't deal with written statements. I always dealt with verbal.
Okay.
People would provide their statements. But when you're talking to someone and they provide things like that, like I immediately called 911. Okay. Again, this is nitpicky. Maybe you don't need to say that. But when someone adds, I guess you call it like an identifier like that, they're
Mm-hmm.
putting emphasis on that I called immediately. And it shortens a time frame of his actions that I think may have been a little longer than what
Mm-hmm.
the way that reads, according to the other person that saw him.
I was going to say, if Drew Hall's account is correct, he says that when he walks outside, Aaron, remember, is pacing in the parking lot and said, when asked where Grant was, he says, he's down there, his truck, he's trapped under his truck. I'm calling 911. And then he calls 911, meaning he did not immediately call 911, but that's the only way he will reference his call every single time, right? So we have that. We also have the incident detail report. Now, what this is, if you guys are not familiar, it's the transmittal between dispatch and first responders. So it's literally just a typed out narrative of what dispatch is telling EMS, fire, police. Okay, so they know what to expect when they get there. Now, I'm going to have to talk to Angie some more about this. This is one question I didn't, ask her. But you guys, this report is multiple pages long, and because that was like a 4.5 minute 911 call. So it's got significant verbiage in it. And if you can even see the black here, this is all what's been redacted from that 911 call or the dispatch. So we can hear the call. Obviously, we know what Aaron said, but we don't know what all this is that was typed that was redacted. And I've asked you about that. Is there anything that you can think of that?
No. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't know why. I don't know why it would be redacted if you're releasing that information. So I don't know.
And again, keep in mind, you guys, this hasn't been investigated as anything other than the 57-minute investigation, if you will, of what they consider an accidental death. So it's not like we're talking to things that are, tight-lipped because it's an ongoing murder investigation, or even that foul play was suspected. They don't say any of those things. So like all of this stuff is absolutely public account. So you may be interested then to hear about that truck, right? So, back to Ty Wilson, the one with the quite brief statement that is the one who evidently wrapped up the investigation, cleared everything out. The tow truck comes. Aaron leaves with Grant. They go to the hospital. All of these things happen. And one thing that I think has been the consensus amongst everyone is that a crash reconstruction would normally occur. Would you say that's the case with the vehicle accident involving
Yes.
an injury? or fatality?
Yes, definitely a fatality.
Okay. So, I mean, what does that normally look like? Would the highway be shut down? Would this take time? Would this?
Yeah, I mean, every jurisdiction is different, but normally you shut it down like a crime scene, depending on how wide it needs to be, and then you just start working it. You do your photographs, you do your measurements, take your statements from witnesses, you pull any video cameras from surrounding areas, you look at the injuries, what parts of the body came in contact with the vehicle, the path of the vehicle. Does the path of the vehicle make sense? The investigators can do calculations to tell what the speeds of vehicles are sometimes based on what is left on the crime scene.
Okay.
So yeah, it would take a long time.
Well, so in theory, we have a crash investigator or reconstructor present, and that would be none other than Ty Wilson, that same police officer. So we do see these things sometimes where you kind of keep coming back to the same person. There's like this little, almost like the fatal funnel of that one chain, that one link in the chain. And currently speaking with this case, it seems to be that guy. So there's that. Let's talk about this truck. So time goes by. There is a funeral, which that's also for another show tonight. If we were to get into everything tonight, this show would go on for another 3 hours. But if you listen to Aaron's speech, if you will, I'm not sure what else to call it, at Grant's funeral, you're not going to find more emotion than you find in that 911 call. I can tell you that. And a lot of just interesting wording and these kinds of things. If you guys didn't pick up on it, BC did mention in Aaron's statement to the police that he's changing tenses. So what he's talking about is sometimes he's saying, so I get out of the car, he was this. So like present tense, past tense. Sometimes people can argue that that's because some of the things they're saying is a story that they are fabricating, and some of it is a memory of what happened. So sometimes that can be an indicator of an untruth. We can't say that alone per that statement, but that's something that's worth keeping an eye on. He does this when he recounts what happened verbally as well. And I'm going to play for you guys in a minute a clip of a video taken where Aaron all but reconstructs the accident himself in with a dramatic flair. So we're going to talk about that. But with Grant's truck, that 2015 Toyota Tacoma, that as far as we know, it wasn't investigated. Aaron declined any chance of having it forensically developed, if you will. And so we wouldn't know otherwise what's going on with that. Was it faulty? Did it pop out of gear? He says, he being Aaron, that he thinks that Grant probably just didn't put it in park. This doesn't really make much sense. Grant was 18 years old. I understand he was a young driver, but he was 18. He wasn't 10. There would be no reason to indicate that Grant would get out of the truck to check and get his baseball things out of the back and not put the car in park. That really is not sensical whatsoever. However, we have photos from the scene that show that the truck was in fact in park at the scene with the keys there with it. Now, Aaron takes the truck. Angie will say that she and Gracie begged for it, that Gracie, Grant's little sister, wanted the truck. Aaron took the truck. He didn't take it to have it investigated or to, look for a potential recall or any of these kinds of things. I would venture to say, I'm going to venture to say more probably than BC. He keeps a bit more diplomatic than I do sometimes on these, but I would venture to say he's keeping it because he doesn't want anybody else's hands on it. So he proceeds to take it. He actually drives it briefly. The truck that killed his son, the truck that per his account was faulty, it fell out of gear erroneously, all of these things. He drives it for a while. After having that truck for quite some time, he actually then, and there's really no doubt about this, he commits insurance fraud in the fact that he goes to a State Farm agent and declares the truck totaled and sells it to scrap. So the truck goes to a salvage yard. Okay. Angie, who has impressed me at every turn throughout this entire reading and talking to her, and she's so tenacious and so persistent and so smart and does all the things as much as you can possibly do in a situation like this. And she finally, when she learns that this has happened, she's kind of freaking out, right? Because that truck could be potentially developed and find things in there that we need to know in terms of investigating this death to rule out anything. Okay. And so he goes and sells it to scrap. She, however, goes through multiple salvage yards all through Middle Tennessee until she finds Grant's truck and buys it back. So she actually is currently in possession of Grant's truck. It is with her. So we're going to talk about some of the things she said concerning the truck here in a moment. But I just thought that was incredible that she did that. Like what wit and what, just good moves on her part. So let's play real quick, though. Oh, by the way, in case you were wondering, the truck, in fact, was not totaled. There was nothing wrong with the truck to indicate that it would need to be sold to salvage for scrap. Okay. I'm going to play for you now. I think this is only like a 40-second clip. I've got more lined up that I'll probably put on Instagram. But this clip here was taken days after Grant's death. And this is when Angie and her friend Melanie go to Aaron's house when Aaron still was in possession of this truck. And they ask him questions. They want to get specifics on what Grant looked like. What position was he in? How did he find him when he went down to see him? And I just want you to see this because I don't know if you ever... Did anybody ever see that interview with O.J. Simpson when they ask him what happened to Nicole Brown Simpson? And he's saying, oh, he didn't know. And they're saying, well, could you describe it to me if you could? Like hypothetically, if you did this, how would you do it? If you did this, and he goes on, if you haven't seen it, guys, look it up. He goes on this wild talk for a long time on specifically like how he would do that if he were to have done that to Nicole Brown Simpson. And it's bizarro land, and it's not something you would do. No one would do that, right? So this isn't quite the same in that sense. However, it is Aaron talking, I would just say callously. I mean, it's without any emotion other than, you know what? You guys watch it, and then we're going to talk about it.
Was on him, but that part I think was I think his chest and abdomen area was trapped by the axle, I believe. So this is actually.
How would you know the axle was on him?
Because that's the area. Because that's where. Because of where his head was. And
where were the rocks?
All right, so this is actually a decent example of how. So WPI is up here. Then the parking lot is kind of like this.
Yeah.
And then at the edge of the parking lot, it's just like this, a ditch that's steeper than this, down, and then it goes back up. And so down in here is those rocks.
Okay.
On a little bit of both sides. And then here's 109. So what had happened is the truck actually comes down this, and you can see, I think the bumper got damaged probably when it
ducked.
Like there.
Yeah,
yes, but with the force was so much, the truck, when it settled, was actually, the front was kind of against that side of the ditch, and the back end was actually stuck up on almost the shoulder of 109. So
that's why the front end was tilted a little bit back down.
Yes.
And that's why,
yes.
and that's what was laying on him.
Yes. So the heavy part of the truck is on his end. Also, it's extremely unstable. As soon as they hopped out, they had stabilization things for the back and jacks for the front, so they could jack it up without it rolling forward on top of him more. Because the truck had actually settled, just like the truck came down through here. And
okay, I don't know. What did you guys get from that? So let's see. I'm trying to read some of y'all's comments. So, so that video actually, so it starts out with Angie, like they're secretly recording him first. That's why a lot of those angles are kind of funny. You can watch this. You can go to freedomforgracie.com. We're going to talk about that website. You can find it on YouTube now. It's pretty widely out there. But she first is kind of secretly filming him doing this. But then I think at some point he kind of sees her phone. So she then says, like, I'm filming this because, I can't sleep at night without quite well knowing what all happened exactly. And I want to be able to have this to go back to and watch. Well, she's a smart cookie, and I'm really glad she filmed it, because this actually winds up being, I believe, a 52-minute long video. And in it, you're going to see a giant portion of it being Aaron. Some of it leaves his home and goes to the actual site where this happened, where Grant got hurt. And so, but you see Aaron almost, BC, I said to you that I felt like he was almost excited. It's like the more he told this story, the more he felt they were believing him, and the more he almost seemed to get, I hate to say it that way, but like amped up in telling it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can watch people sometimes when they're trying to convince somebody else of whatever. I mean, obviously, in this situation, we're reading into a lot of what he's saying, his body language. Are the facts what he's saying? Could it happen that way? And it does. It seems to have some red flags like that of him speeding up his speech a little bit when he's talking and getting a little more kind of more like you're saying, like that, like he's trying to convince them of that. Yeah.
And I think he thought he was.
Yeah.
Like, I think he thought he was convincing them, and that seemed to be exciting him.
And I think that...
Or making him feel comfortable, I should say, that he's gotten away with something.
Yes. Yeah. When someone is trying to deceive another person, and then they start to... They're reading the other person's body language, and they realize, oh, I might have them convinced. Mm-hmm. And then they almost
let me show you more.
Then they can get a little more excited. Their body language get a little more elevated, a little more come along with me. Yeah, isn't it crazy how this happened?
Right. And I think you noted that a good point to take away from this video is that when he first starts to speak with police, it's very just a few bullet points. It's, I don't know. I heard a crash. I looked down. He was there. So little detail to the point that he couldn't have even told you what his son looked like down there per his account, because he didn't even go see him, right? When he was calling 911, he had himself physically distanced from his son on purpose, we'll say. But when it comes to this recreation of this event, of what happened, of Grant's position under the truck, of how everything looked and sounded and appeared to Aaron, the details are immense. He gets very detailed then. I mean, when they say, was he lying like this? He goes down and almost corrects him by like 6 inches. Oh, actually, it's a little more like this. And I mean, just over and over. There's a part where I certainly want to vomit when they talk about how difficult it is to sleep at night without knowing, they being Angie and her friend, like, what happened to Grant, how this happened to Grant. And Aaron says, it's even, and he almost, it's a chuckle almost as he says, it's worse for me because I was there. Yeah. He'll say later that the guys there, these construction workers that have never been talked to, that they tell him that he needs to stay where he is and he just needs to sit down because he's just getting so, overwhelmed. Yeah. But we heard the 911 call. I don't consider this to be, Yeah, Silly Mander just said, not my kid, would still be under that truck and half a heartbeat trying to help. Look, I was at a Christmas parade where a kid, he wound up being okay. I think he broke an ankle, but got taken under a trailer, a big gooseneck trailer at a Christmas parade. And I'm under there getting the kid out, right? Like, you do these things. You can't, instinct has you, human nature has you do these things for people who aren't your kids. Yeah, what?
That's when we stopped when the guy overdosed. and helped get him out of the vehicle, and then had to kind of tell some law enforcement officers how to maybe help him that he had OD'd.
Oh my gosh.
Point being that we did a U-turn. You jumped out of the vehicle and took off running over to help a complete stranger. I'm just saying that usually most people want to try to help somehow. They normally don't try to distance themselves. There's something else.
Unless you've done something you shouldn't have done. And then you might absolutely try to distance yourself. Is that the thing you were going to say?
I was just going to say that I have experienced people who have done that. Now, like we talked about, there can be explanations for behavior, especially if you have a good baseline, if you know the person. You
always say, look at the totality of the case.
I know, I'm not going to bore you with that. I am going to say that.
I'm saying, that's what we have to do.
That would be a wonderful thing to be able to do if this were in fact investigated.
Right.
We would have a lot of that to be able to say, this explains his behavior, or this can't really be explained. This is very odd behavior when, he's recounting things. And it's true. You can have a lot more detail at different times.
Sure.
When you're not in the moment. But yeah, that's some incongruent behavior.
So we also have at the scene, let's talk a little bit about at the scene. We have, let me go on and show you that truck again. I know it's getting late, you guys. Thanks for sticking with us. Whoever's missing this now, definitely catch it later. I'll, again, put these pictures on and more on Instagram on Andrea Up Late tomorrow. But here's an idea. Here's the truck, and here's the ravine. Now, per Aaron's account, this truck rolled backward toward that highway that you're looking at there. It's going to go from this parking lot that's to your right there, per Aaron's account, down this ditch, and evidently so much so, with so much speed that it's now gone back up and over the sidewalk there. Okay? So if you're just listening, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. And if you were to see more photos of this, you can see more scene photos at freedomforgracie.com. You can see that there is some large, like some tall weeds and grass directly in front of the vehicle, meaning weeds and grass that vehicle would have, and not a tiny car either, even though a tiny car would have made some indentations. A truck would have laid some of those down. You would see some discrepancies in that vegetation. You potentially would see tire tracks in mud or dirt, but you would definitely see some movement in that foliage. We actually just were unloading some topsoil for the garden recently, and I had to drive my car into the backyard, and one quick pass, and you can immediately see for about 40 feet in front of you tire marks. So we know that that's the case there. So if you were to look at this picture, like I said, it's as though it rolled down this hill and then back up and out of this ditch. It's kind of a deep ditch lined with rocks. All right. Now let's talk again about Grant's condition, about the medical assessment of his body when he gets there. His injuries or his wounds, are they consistent with this picture and with what Aaron says happened? Absolutely, they are not. And they are not for a multitude of reasons. His shirt was not torn. It was not dirty. It was not ripped. His shorts were not any of those things as well. He had on a pair of shoes that his mother, we've got a picture of them. His mother is in, the shoes are in her possession currently still. And his shoes were without a scratch, a mark, nothing, an extra crease. There was nothing on those shoes. He didn't have one scab, guys, like not one laceration, one nothing from having been dragged, pulled, tumbled under a truck on asphalt, hot asphalt in this whole parking lot. There was not one scratch on his body. Okay. If in fact he were to have been pulled, tumbled, whatever, into this ditch and under this truck, his back, he was lying face up. His back does not have indentations. If that truck ran over him, it would have pressed his back into those rocks. His back was without any injury. We have a list of his injuries here. We have it from EMS. We have it from the trauma bay, from the ED, intake nurses and physicians. We have all of that. And none of that indicates anything other than, I will show you, and I will put this picture up. Again, this is on Freedom for Gracie. This is one of the things that's public knowledge, but we have the diagram of his body, and it shows specifically he had a bruise to his left. They say jaw. It gets a little mixed, but when you look at the picture, they're actually pointing to a place on his cheek. Okay. So a bruise on his left cheek. He had the open head injury, right? The skull fracture to the back of his skull with some lacerations around that, to the skin on his skull there on the back. And he had a bruise to his hip. The bruise to his hip could be anything. I'm not really taking that one here nor there. It could happen from whatever happened this day at WPI, or it could happen because he played baseball. I have 2 boys that play baseball. They have hip bruises often if they're sliding. If they're, that is not unheard of at all. But either way, the hip thing doesn't. I'm less concerned with what he does have and more concerned with what he doesn't, based on the narrative that Aaron gives. Dave, you made a good point. No road rash, no anything, and it's a vehicle homicide. That's not going to pass. I fully agree. And that's been Angie's complaint this entire time. She, in fact, will say, and she'll tell you next week, you guys, but when she saw Grant, because she saw him, she went to the hospital there and was able to lay eyes on her son. And she said he looked just like himself. Like she was worried, of course, about what she was going to find. All she hears on the phone is that his truck has run over him. And so she said that she actually told me when we were on the phone with her that it almost looked as though he had taken a shower, in the sense that his hair was wet because of the blood from the head injury. So his hair looked wet. But outside of that, his skin was pristine. His skin wasn't mangled and torn and bloody. And I'm sorry, but his hands, his fingers, anything would have had marks on them. Do you have anything to say to that?
No, you'll probably say something about it, but if you were to take that exact same vehicle, which Angie has, and actually recreate that to see just how, like we've talked about, what would happen? Would it roll? If it did roll, what would it take to get enough speed to actually bottom out in that ditch and then put the tires back up the other side? Yes. And if it does that, does it come in contact with the rocks? Right. As in bumper to the rocks. And if it does that, why would he not have those types of injuries if in fact somehow he is behind that vehicle? Right. And also because, keep in mind, again, his size, you guys, 6'3", 6'4", 230. Okay. This isn't a small child. So if what Aaron says holds true, if that truck reversed, if that truck went backward down this hill, guys, this was a very small parking lot. So please keep that in mind. This was not a steep hill. In fact, I think that picture I show kind of gives the perception that it's even steeper than it really is, because we saw other vantage points that show it's much more level than it appears in that picture until you get to the actual ditch. So the parking lot is very, very small. So we're saying that this truck had to have been able to gain the speed, the distance and speed to create this kind of injury or then death, as it did. And Grant was lying with his head toward the front, the cab of the vehicle. So if it took him down, his head should be lying facing the highway toward the bed of the vehicle. That would be what makes sense there. So, we'll talk more specifically about seeing stuff on the next show, because we could talk about that forever and ever and ever. I will say the one big ticket for me is that I don't think we have the picture here, but when we talked about it, none of it quite made sense. And so without knowing the details, without knowing what happened, we will speculate here, because that's what this is about. The whole reason we're doing the show is because this needs to at least be opened to an investigation. They can find from it what they will, but it needs to be an investigation
to see the facts. Exactly. Sillymander in chat says that he should have all sorts of dirt and grass. There was no dirt. There was no grass. There was no nothing under his fingernails stuck to his clothes. I made that point myself. Even out in the garden, I was walking, and just by taking steps, like a little twig with some leaves on it that was dead in the grass stuck to my shoe, and everywhere I went, it would not come off of my shoe. Like, so if he's tumbled under a truck onto that vegetation that we saw, also the back of the truck, the bumper should have weeds stuck in it, or, pulled toward it in the tires, something. None of that happened. Okay. None of that happened. And it didn't happen the way Aaron says that it happened. It physically could not have. And I'll tell you why I feel confident in saying as much here in a moment. But we tried. We said, I know I don't have a Tacoma, but I have a 4Runner, nearly the same year model. And tires don't turn. If a car goes in reverse, tires don't turn. We're going to talk about those tires. And it just didn't go. We put it in neutral. We put it in, popped it out of gear, did whatever. Even if it were to have erroneously popped out of gear, it somehow popped itself right back in park when it got down there, because it was in park. So what was really kind of getting me is that it didn't make sense that the truck went backwards. And this is before we saw the pictures of the truck as it was. I wanted to see a picture of the tires of the truck, because the only thing that made sense to me was whatever happened down on those rocks. If they get into an argument, if Aaron flew into a fit of rage, if something happened, and somehow we have Grant incapacitated, laying in that ditch, and now Aaron has to scramble. He has to hurry and figure out something because it's by a highway and somebody's going to see something, right? So I said, as we were talking about it, we said, what if he just drove, not reversed, drove out of that driveway of WPI and then turned into the ditch, pulled into the ditch and drive and not in reverse. And if he did that, his wheels would be cut to the right if he hurriedly exited the truck. And so we were able to go back and find pictures, of the truck. And I don't know if you can tell here, this is a bit grainy there, but if you see in some other photos, you can see clearly that the front tires are cut to the right. A better idea of a vantage point there would be that. So you've got the truck. If he drove it out of that parking lot and then whipped right back into that ditch, those tires would be cut to the right. Now, why didn't Grant have any crushing chest injuries or broken ribs or bruising or these kinds of things on his body? Because the truck did not run over him. When he pulled in, as far as I can imagine, he threaded Grant's body through those tires. He pulled over him, not on top of him. Okay? So we played that scenario out in our heads a million times. Of course, we can't say we didn't reconstruct the scene. We don't know. That seems to be the most plausible evidence. We also have tire tracks behind that truck, not in front of it. Like in the sand, dirt on the sidewalk, behind it, not in front of it. Again, further indicating that the truck was driven into the ditch. When we spoke with Angie, she 100% was on board with that idea based off of everything that she knows, the investigators she's talked to privately and hired. That at least seems logical. It would also stand to reason that his glasses would be found where they were found near the rear of the truck if he was assaulted to the face. That would explain the bruise on his left cheek. She said she was used to those bruises on him because when he wore glasses all the time. And so when he was playing baseball, he would wear like the athletic goggles, and she was used to those. And she said that whenever they'd get hit, a lens would pop out and he'd get a bruise on his cheek right there, right where the glasses butted up on his cheekbone. And sure enough, when she finds his glasses at the scene, they were, one of the goggles lenses was popped out and he had that bruise on his cheek. Now, Aaron Solomon is about 5'8", maybe $150. He's not a large man. Compared to the size of his son, he's not going to throw hands like that. Like he's not going to, I don't think, feel like he can just get in a fist fight with his son. We know it's getting late. This show is getting very long. We can put this out into 2, 3, 4 episodes if we need to, but we do know that he was prone to fits of rage. We know that if he could have rendered Grant incapacitated in a fit of rage, covering his body with the truck is about the only thing he can do. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm not saying that Aaron did it. I'm saying just based on size comparison, all those things, rage can cause somebody to punch or hit with their fist or an item and knock somebody out. Like we've talked about, that's possible based on where things were placed out there. If you were to reenact it.
So by knock somebody out, do you mean he falls backwards and lands on the one pointy rock that is covered in his blood that was lying beside his head when EMS arrived to the scene?
Yes, that could be possible based on looking at those photos. That would make sense. Like when we're looking at that and explaining how could this have happened?
And the way that rock looks, it looks much more like Grant's head could have fallen backward on it, causing the then fatal injury to the back of the skull, rather than he was hit with the rock. Because, guys, it was covered. That rock is covered in blood, and it kind of goes down. Angie does have that rock in her possession. So she has that with her, and has shown us some pictures of that as well. So his glasses and his cell phone were found in that same location, both indicating or corroborating what could have been an attack from the front, Aaron's right hand or right side of his body, to Grant's left cheek that could have rendered him to fall backward, and everything else that ensued after that. But his phone was there. Grant had Life 360, so we are able to track that phone. That phone was not brought back to Angie immediately. In fact, the phone gets taken and driven all through Gallatin that whole day, and is returned to her the next day. But now the screen is smashed on it. And it wasn't working properly, but it was working prior to that because his Life 360 app was on. So there's that. Let's speak as we wrap it up. We will get into more detail. You guys really won't believe. This is just laying the groundwork for what you're going to hear next week, because when we have Angie on, you just won't believe your ears, in the sense that this is nuts. This is, if y'all thought like Boys on the Tracks and those shows and conspiracies, if that was something that you thought was wild, just come back next week. Trust me on this one. At every turn, my mouth just falls open when I'm reading this and hearing these things. We know that Grant had gone to the public, had gone to his friends and family to state that when he turned 18, he wanted to gain custody of his sister. He had to do this because his mother, remember, could not. In fact, a judge told Angie, deemed her basically not stable, if you will. This has not been corroborated by medical experts or mental health experts. In fact, they've said just the opposite. But this judge rendered a ruling that Angie could not essentially file any litigation against Aaron for 6 years because she didn't feel that any of Angie's claims were substantiated. Meaning when Gracie went to the school and told her principal that she was being sexually abused by her father, when she told someone else at the school, Tennessee is a mandatory reporting state. If a child tells you that, you have to report it. It is against the law not to report it. Whether you believe it or not, whether it's substantiated or not, you have to report it. And no one reported it. That's the Gracie portion. You guys, we're talking about Grant and this horrible, horrible death of Grant. We've still got Gracie. Gracie's still with us, and Gracie's still living with all of these things that happened to her. Okay. So we have all of these things happening, and Grant saying, you know what, I'm gonna get custody of, or at least per court, right, per legal ease, custody of Gracie when I turn 18. And 5 weeks later, he's dead. Okay. But let me tell you one more little thing before we go. Grant had started to become a bit almost depressed, if you will. He was getting really down in the dumps because while he was so excited to graduate and continue to play baseball, he didn't know why he wasn't getting any offers. None of the schools that he wanted to reach out and, like, you know, give him offers to play ball for them were reaching out. This is something he knew he was capable of, something he knew he could do because his friends were getting these offers. So he wasn't even getting, his mom will say, offers from kind of like the, you know, little tiny schools around the area, much less the larger ones that he wanted to play for. And this was really bumming him out, and he was getting really confused by it and frustrated at this lack of communication from the schools. Now, Aaron will tell anyone who will listen that he only wanted Grant to play baseball for Harvard. Yes, I said Harvard, which I actually almost chuckled when Angie told me that, because I think Harvard is known for a lot of things, but I don't think their baseball team is one of them. But this is what mattered to Aaron. Okay, so this is what he wanted. Well, very shortly before Grant's death, Grant learned that Aaron had fudged addresses on a lot of these applications to schools. And instead of Grant receiving the applications himself, meaning the offers, these offer letters from school to play ball, they were coming straight to Aaron, and he was discarding them. He was trashing them all. So Grant had learned of this not too long before his death. So I will venture to say, I don't think Aaron intended to go to WPI that morning and kill his son. And I say that because why would anyone with 2 brain cells go to a public place on a main highway to do that planned? However, we know that Aaron was prone to fits of rage multiple times amongst multiple people. Okay. And over many years. So if he makes up this fake appointment, remember, they were not on the books for WPI. Angie thought so. Grant thought so. They all thought so because he said it. If they get there, and maybe we don't know, maybe his idea was to put a little pressure on Grant to either keep his mouth shut about Gracie or whatever. And in the meantime, Grant's gained some confidence. He has since turned 18. And he spouts off to his dad because he's angry. He's angry that his dad has kept these offers from him. I mean, much less would have a kid spouting off to their dad, I think. I mean, this is a very big deal. And if Grant had something to say about it and they get in a bit of a verbal something, I think it stands to reason to believe that Aaron could have done something. He could have snapped in that moment. You know, I don't know. I will tell you that when I asked Angie some questions to clarify a few things right before tonight, I had asked her in the past few days, and she has been a busy bee. And I'll tell you why she's been busy. And so I asked her to clarify, did Aaron in fact say something at Grant's service to she and Gracie along the lines of, now we can be a family? She said, actually, he said that when I got off the floor at the hospital after realizing Grant was dead. It was the first words he spoke to me. And yes, he also said it again at the service before we went out. Why would he say that? I mean, is it because Grant's out of the way now? Why would he say that? Of all the things. I told you Angie was able to get the car back from the salvage yard. She found it. She tracked it down. She bought it back. And she has since hired her own team to investigate this, to develop it forensically, to run all these things on it. So I said, what is it that I'm reading about blood inside the truck? Did you in fact find blood inside the truck? She said, yes. Per her account, she said blood spatter, right passenger side by front window and up and over the handle there that you hold on to. She said it's enough to know what it is. And the dash appeared it had been cleaned by the time she got in it. And you can see that it was only cleaned halfway over, like toward the driver's side. Okay. She said that I asked her if she had the rock in her physical possession. I thought that she had mentioned before that she did, and she says that she does. And then I said, she said that, I said, are the findings back from your private forensic testing of the truck, or when do you expect them to be? And she said, yes, they are back, and they conclude that what Aaron, the witness, said could not be possible. So that's huge, because it's never been investigated, y'all. Like, there's not been an investigation to this. So we are going to talk about all things, corruption, all things gross, to be honest, all things money as time goes on. I don't know. It will,
Yeah, there's a lot to get into still.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've almost barely scratched the surface. This is just the events leading up to that and what happened there. There's more corruption. There's more grossness. I will tell you this, though. This is the good thing. For years, this was 2020 again. And for years, nothing came. This was Angie just clawing tooth and nail to try to get some wheels greased, someone to listen, someone to want to investigate it. When she calls Gallatin Police Department, they do not speak. They will say they won't take her calls. They turn down any reporter wanting to talk to them. Essentially, they say case closed. They say that they have evidence to show that this was an accident and not foul play, but they will not say what evidence they have. In fact, I would think that you would have, you wouldn't have evidence that it wasn't, right? But
you better, I'm going to cut you off.
Yeah.
You better, if you're saying that as an agency or department, you better be able to prove it. And it's horrible to have to sit with the family and talk to them about an incident when they, in fact, think they have a loved one who was murdered and say it was suicide. And you have to sit down and you have to talk to them. This was suicide, and you have to walk them through the steps
because they keep wanting you to open a case, right?
Yes.
And you can't.
Yes, and you do that because that's what happened. That's the truth, and the family needs to know it. It's horrible to have to do that, but you do it. In this situation, like we talked about, it just needs to be investigated. If it were investigated, you could go back right now based on everything that she has done and collected. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, she's done the work for him, right? I mean, goodness.
Well, right. At least look at it and, like we talked about, reconstruct it. Take that vehicle, put it out of gear, let it roll. Let's see what it does. There are plenty of things to do for follow-up. We can get into that, on a different episode. But yes, that's kind of the big problem, like we've talked about, and we talked with Angie too. Is just an investigation is an investigation, and that's. When you have information like that, and the injuries and the things don't seem to add up or make sense, mm-hmm. I feel like it has to be explained to the family as best you can. And since this is not an ongoing investigation, from what we understand,
yep,
then
there's no reason not to. Like I said, Gracie put out a YouTube video in May of 2021. You can go back and listen. There's a time when she recounts words that she wrote in when she was 13 years old, and she goes back and reads them when she's a little bit older. It's very tough to listen to, extremely tough. However, it does provide, again, some more framework, some more groundwork for what we're dealing with here when we're talking about Aaron Solomon. We know that in March of 2022, Aaron filed a lawsuit against Angie. There was like a whole idea of a slander campaign. He files lawsuits against her. I believe it was like 29 other people he tried to shush. Eventually, that was thrown out. And when that was thrown out, that's when the website Freedom for Gracie, if I'm not mistaken, actually started thriving, because then they could say all the things, put it all out there, show these sources, show these scene photos, show all this stuff, let the public be made aware. The one positive thing from all this is that most recently it has picked up traction. In fact, just since we've been talking to Angie, it's been picking up traction, meaning this story. And in fact, tonight we were going back and forth, texting tonight, because she was about to get on a call with Ashley Banfield. That's the News Nation network lady. So that's actually a really big deal. That's a great movement for Angie. She's going to be on Dan Abrams, I believe, tomorrow. She's got some big stuff lined up, which is great. She's going to be talking to Cheryl McCullum, who goes by Mac. She is actually she was heavy on the Natalie Holloway case. Chandra Levy. She, Daily Mail actually just headlined the case yesterday, which was huge. And we've learned that Nancy Grace is going to pick up the case. So we at least know that a lot more eyes and a lot more ears, meaning a lot more pressure for the police department, are going to be on this. And as BC said, if there's nothing to worry about, if what they said is true, great. Open it up and explain that to her and tell her why. Tell her why it couldn't have been foul play. But if that's not the case, if you cannot tell her why that is, just investigate. That's all it is. Investigate. There's no reason not to. Again, we are talking about Gallatin PD and Sumner County Sheriff's Department. You can find a lot of this information on Freedom for Gracie. You can also go to change.org to sign a petition. And this is to try, I think they've got like over 300,000 some signatures now. But again, it's the petition that kind of articulates why the case needs to be reopened. But I don't know. I think for tonight's show, that at least lays the case out to talk to Angie next week.
Yes.
And to hear some of what she's been up to, and maybe just how deep some of these roots go.
Mm-hmm.
Whoo-wee. All right. I'm going to need some more water. Yeah. Okay, guys. Thank you guys for hanging in there. I know it was a long one, but it's so worth it. BC, you've got classes coming up you're teaching.
Yes. Back teaching in person. Tomorrow and Thursday I'll be teaching in person. And that's for federal agents, deputies, officers. And I'm going to start doing virtual classes again. So I'll post those as I make the schedule for that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we've just got this going on over here. And so I say just got this going on. Man, it has taken a lot of brain work over here. But we appreciate you guys tuning in every Tuesday at 8/7 Central on the Andrea Uplate YouTube channel. I think I've used all my words for the evening, and they're all gone. You can yawn. It's fine.
No, I can't. Better than sneezer.
It's fine. Oh my. Well, you guys, thanks for tuning in again on Andrea Uplate Instagram page tomorrow. I will put up a lot of these pictures and things like that, so you can see some more of exactly what we're talking about. And when we were describing the scene and such as that, you can go, Freedom for Gracie actually has an Instagram page as well. So go over there and like their page, check out that change.org petition for, to try to, get this case open, make it a case. So, I guess until next week, we will see y'all next Tuesday. Night, y'all.